The train hissed like a tired animal as it slowed to a stop in the small, dust-bitten town of Willow Creek, and Clara May Whitfield stood frozen on the narrow wooden platform, clutching a single worn suitcase. Her gloved hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything she had left behind and everything she was about to face. This was the end of the road that had begun with a newspaper advertisement written bold, hopeful letters, promising a respectable rancher seeking a wife, honest work, a steady home, and a chance at love in the wide-open West. Standing there now, with the smell of coal smoke in the air and the wind tugging at her coat, Clara understood how thin paper promises could be when tested by reality. She had read that advertisement 100 times by candlelight in her cramped boarding room back east, imagining a future where struggle would finally give way to stability. But as she stepped down onto the platform, alone and unseen, she felt the truth settle in her chest. This land did not know her name or her past. It owed her nothing. The town itself looked unimpressed by her arrival. A handful of weather-beaten buildings leaned into the wind. A saloon creaked with tired swinging doors. A general store stared back with dusty windows. Beyond it all stretched endless open land that felt less like freedom and more like a test she was not sure she could pass. Passengers hurried past her, eager to be done with travel, and Clara searched their faces for the man she had memorized from his letters. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hat, steady eyes. Minutes passed heavy and slow. No one spoke her name. No one smiled with recognition. Fear tightened in her chest, just as a man stepped out from the shadows near the freight crates. His boots sounded heavy on the boards. His presence filled the space without effort. Clara knew at once this had to be him. Jacob Hale was taller than she expected, his face carved by sun and hard years, his jaw set like smiling, was a luxury he could not afford. When his eyes met hers, there was no warmth, only a measured look, as if she were being weighed and found uncertain. Clara felt her stomach drop, but she straightened her back. She had not crossed half the country to shrink now. She offered a careful smile. He did not return it. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, asking her name as though he were not already certain. She answered softly, Clara Whitfield, hoping for something kind in return. What came instead fell heavy between them. He studied her once more and said she did not look like what he expected. The words shattered the fragile dream she had carried all this way. Clara swallowed the hurt and reminded herself that patience had been her survival skill for as long as she could remember. Without another word, Jacob turned and motioned for her to follow. He did not take her suitcase. He did not ask about her journey. The wagon ride to the ranch passed in near silence, the wheels crunching over dirt roads as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in colors she wished she could enjoy. Her mind replayed every letter he had sent, all careful and distant, speaking of need rather than love. With every mile, her small hopes wilted. The ranch stood large and lonely when they arrived. The house was solid but bare, surrounded by rolling land that breathed with quiet power. For a brief moment, Clara felt awe. This place was real. It could be built upon. That feeling faded when Jacob finally faced her and said plainly that there had been a mistake. He had expected someone different, someone stronger, someone more suited to ranch life. He could not afford sentiment. He needed practicality. The meaning was clear. She was not what he wanted. The rejection was swift and merciless. Clara stood still, suitcase at her feet, the sun sinking behind the hills. She could not cry. She would not beg. Dignity was the one thing she refused to surrender. When she asked calmly if there was a town nearby where she might find lodging, Jacob hesitated, then gave directions without meeting her eyes. She thanked him anyway and walked away, each step carrying her further into uncertainty. The road stretched long and empty as night crept in, and fear finally found its way into her thoughts. Then a lantern appeared in the distance, carried by an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Holloway. She had heard about the mail-order bride through town gossip and offered Clara a room and a hot meal without judgment. That simple kindness steadied something inside her. That night, lying beneath a patchwork quilt, Clara cried quietly, not from weakness, but because she was human. She promised herself this rejection would not be the end of her story. Miles away, Jacob Hale sat alone at his table, staring at an empty chair, uneasy despite himself. Under the same wide sky, both lay awake, unaware that this ending was only the beginning. Morning came softly to Willow Creek, the sunlight slipping through the thin curtains of the boarding house and resting on Clara Whitfield's face like a gentle hand. She lay still for a long moment, listening to the quiet sounds of the town waking. A wagon creaked somewhere outside. A rooster called from a distant yard. Life was moving forward, whether she was ready or not. Yesterday's rejection still ached deep in her chest, but beneath that ache was something stronger. Resolve. She sat up, smoothed her hair, and reminded herself that survival had never been handed to her. She had always earned it. Downstairs, Mrs. Holloway moved about the kitchen with practiced ease. The smell of eggs and fresh bread filled the air, warm and comforting. Clara helped without being asked, setting plates, pouring coffee, grateful for something useful to do. Mrs. Holloway spoke little, but her presence was steady, and that steadiness mattered. It made Clara feel less like a burden and more like a person again. After breakfast, Clara stepped out into the street. Willow Creek looked different in the daylight, still rough, still worn, but alive. Shopkeepers swept dust from their doorways. Children ran barefoot between buildings, laughing. A woman waved from across the road. Clara returned the gesture, surprised by how much it lifted her spirits. This place might not have welcomed her at first, but it had not shut its doors either. Over the next few days, Clara found herself settling into a rhythm. She helped Mrs. Holloway clean rooms and prepare meals. She ran small errands into town, learning names and faces. Some people asked curious questions. Some kept their distance. Most were simply polite. With each passing day, the tight knot inside her loosened just a little. She began to believe she could make a life here, even if it was not the one she had planned. Still, Jacob Hale lingered in her thoughts like an unfinished sentence. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she was better off. Yet she could not forget the look in his eyes, hard but troubled, as if something inside him had already decided he did not deserve happiness. She wondered what kind of life carved a man into someone so guarded. Jacob, for his part, was not sleeping well. Nights on the ranch stretched long and empty. The house felt larger than it had before, every creak reminding him of the woman he had sent away. He told himself he had done the right thing. Ranch life was unforgiving. He needed strength, certainty, someone who would not break. Yet no matter how often he repeated it, the image of Clara standing alone with her suitcase refused to leave him. Work became his refuge. He rose before dawn, pushing himself harder than usual. He repaired fences that did not need fixing. He rode the perimeter again and again, chasing away thoughts he did not want to face. The hands noticed his mood but said nothing. Jacob Hale was not a man easily questioned. Then one morning, riding toward town to collect supplies, he saw her. Clara stood near a small henhouse behind a neighbor's place, gathering eggs into a basket. She looked smaller than he remembered, yet somehow steadier. She moved with quiet purpose, speaking kindly to the woman beside her, smiling at a child who hovered nearby. Jacob slowed his horse without meaning to. Watching her, he felt something twist in his chest. She had not broken, she had adapted. Before he could talk himself out of it, he dismounted and walked toward her. When he said her name, she turned slowly. There was caution in her eyes, but no fear, no pleading. That alone unsettled him. They were awkward at first, standing a few steps apart like strangers. Jacob cleared his throat and spoke of the weather, of town matters, of anything but the truth. Clara listened politely, waiting. Finally, words failed him, and silence filled the space. It was Clara who broke it, asking what he wanted. Her voice was calm, but firm. She had learned not to waste time on uncertainty. Jacob took a breath and said what he had come to say. He admitted the rejection had been sudden and unfair. He spoke of his fear, his past mistakes, his belief that softness had no place on a ranch like his. He told her seeing her now, standing on her own, had forced him to question those beliefs. His voice was rough, but there was honesty in it. Clara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she did not rush to comfort him. She told him rejection was something she knew well. That strength did not always look the way men expected it to. She said she would not beg for a place in anyone's life. If he had come seeking forgiveness, that would take time. If he had come seeking help, that would require respect. Jacob nodded, accepting her words without argument. He asked if she would consider working on the ranch, helping where she could, not as a bride, not as an obligation, but as a partner in the work. The offer surprised them both. Clara studied him, weighing the risk. At last she agreed, on her own terms. She would help, and she would be treated fairly. The days that followed changed them both. Clara arrived at the ranch each morning, with determination in her step. She learned quickly, asking questions, listening, adapting. She helped mend fences, tended animals, organized the household with efficiency that surprised the ranch hands. Some doubted her at first. Most came to respect her. Jacob watched it all with quiet admiration. He saw her intelligence, her endurance, her ability to face hard tasks without complaint. He found himself laughing more, tension easing from his shoulders. Conversations grew longer. Silences grew comfortable. Slowly, the distance between them narrowed. One evening, a storm rolled in fast and fierce. Rain lashed the land, thunder shaking the ground. Clara and Jacob took shelter in the barn, sharing blankets and stories while the wind howled outside. In that small circle of warmth, walls came down. Jacob spoke of loss, of responsibilities that had hardened him. Clara spoke of loneliness, of hope that refused to die. When the storm passed, something between them had shifted. Weeks turned into something like peace. The ranch thrived under shared effort. Townsfolk noticed the change. Whispers followed them, but Clara no longer minded. She knew her worth now. She had earned it, step by step. One quiet morning, watching the sun rise over fields wet with dew, Jacob finally said what had been growing inside him. He admitted he had been wrong, not just about her, but about himself. That strength could live beside kindness. That partnership meant seeing, truly seeing, the person beside you. Clara listened, her heart full but cautious. She told him love could not be demanded or rushed. It had to be chosen, again and again. Jacob agreed. For the first time, patience felt like hope rather than fear. They stood together in the soft light, not as a rancher and a rejected bride, but as two people who had learned the cost of pride and the value of second chances. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk, side by side, and for the first time since she arrived in Willow Creek, Clara felt something steady bloom in her chest. A future, earned and real. The change between Clara Whitfield and Jacob Hale did not come with grand promises or sudden declarations. It came quietly, shaped by early mornings, shared work, and long evenings where words were no longer feared. Each day on the ranch tested them in new ways, and each test drew them closer, not through romance alone, but through trust that had been earned the hard way. Clara no longer arrived at the ranch as a guest. She came as someone with purpose. She learned the land, the moods of the cattle, the rhythm of the seasons. She noticed things others overlooked, broken hinges, wasted supplies, small changes in the animals that signaled trouble ahead. Jacob began to rely on her judgment, sometimes without even realizing it. When problems came, and they always did, they faced them together. One afternoon, a young calf went missing during a sudden cold snap. The ranch hands were ready to write it off as a loss. Clara refused. She insisted they search the lower ravine where snow drifted deep. Jacob hesitated only a moment before trusting her instinct. They found the calf shivering but alive, tucked behind fallen brush. As Jacob lifted the animal into his arms, he looked at Clara with something close to awe. That moment stayed with him. The town of Willow Creek took notice as well. People who once whispered now nodded with approval. Mrs. Holloway smiled knowingly whenever Clara returned to the boarding house, tired but satisfied. She said nothing, but her eyes spoke of pride. Clara still slept there, choosing independence over comfort, and Jacob respected that choice even when it cost him patience. Not everything was easy. Old habits die slowly. Jacob sometimes fell back into silence when worry pressed too hard. Clara sometimes held her heart at a distance, afraid of trusting too much. When tension rose, they argued. But the arguments were honest. They did not wound. They listened. Each disagreement became another stone laid into the foundation they were building. The true test came late one evening when a group of ranchers arrived with bad news. A neighboring landowner planned to challenge Jacob's water rights, a move that could cripple the ranch. Tempers flared. Voices rose. Jacob felt the familiar pull to shut down, to face the threat alone. Before he could retreat, Clara spoke. Calm, clear. She suggested negotiation before confrontation, a shared solution that would protect both sides. Some scoffed. Others listened. Jacob watched her stand firm under their scrutiny and realized how wrong he had been at the beginning. Strength did not always shout. Sometimes it stood quietly and refused to move. He backed her plan, and against expectations, it worked. The conflict eased. The ranch was safe. That night, Jacob walked Clara back toward town beneath a sky filled with stars. The silence between them was gentle, filled with things understood without words. At the edge of the road, he stopped. He told her he was grateful, not just for what she had done, but for who she was. He admitted that rejecting her had been the greatest mistake of his life. Clara listened, her heart full and steady. She told him that rejection had nearly broken her, but it had also shown her who she was capable of becoming. She said she would not erase the past, but she could choose the future. She asked him one question, quiet but powerful. Was he willing to choose her, every day without fear? Jacob answered without hesitation, yes. The choice changed everything, not in a single moment, but in countless small ones that followed. Clara moved to the ranch by her own decision, not as a bride fulfilling an arrangement, but as a partner shaping a shared life. The house grew warmer, filled with laughter and conversation. Meals became something more than necessity. They became connection. Ranch hands noticed the difference in Jacob. His shoulders were lighter. His temper softened. He listened more. He trusted. Clara earned their respect fully, not through charm, but through consistency and courage. She worked alongside them, never asking for special treatment, never backing away from hard days. Seasons turned. Winter loosened its grip. Spring brought green fields and new life. One morning, as Clara stood watching the sunrise from the porch, Jacob joined her. He placed a simple ring in her hand. Nothing fancy, just honest and true. He did not kneel. He did not make speeches. He simply asked if she would walk beside him for the rest of their days. Clara said yes, not because she needed him, but because she wanted him. The answer felt right, grounded, earned. The wedding was small, held under open sky, attended by townsfolk who had come to see her as one of their own. Mrs. Holloway cried openly. The land seemed to breathe easier. Life did not become perfect. Hard days still came. Storms still tested them. Loss and worry still found their way in. But now they faced everything together, with honesty and respect. Love, Clara learned, was not something that arrived fully formed. It was something built patiently through effort and choice. Sometimes, at night, she thought back to that first moment on the platform, the sting of rejection, the fear of being alone. She realized then that had Jacob welcomed her without question, she might never have discovered her own strength. She might never have claimed her dignity so fiercely. Rejection had not been the end. It had been the fire that forged something stronger. Jacob, too, remembered that day, often with quiet regret and gratitude intertwined. Turning her away had forced him to face his own fears. Loving her taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Together they stood as proof that second chances were not about forgetting the past, but about learning from it. That strength came in many forms. That love, when chosen freely and built on respect, could heal wounds thought too deep to mend. And as the sun set over the ranch, painting the land in gold and shadow, Clara Whitfield knew she had found more than a home. She had found herself. And in doing so, she had found a love strong enough to last, born not from promise, but from perseverance, dignity, and the courage to keep going when everything once seemed lost.